go again.
Hey guys, Jim here. Welcome in once again. And today we're going to be taking a look at something very, very different from the knives that I typically cover. Now, this is going to be the Fallen Star made by Christopher Gillian, who is named his company Gillian Knives. This is a rather intriguing knife. And I'm going to start here from the get-go saying something or revealing the end, I suppose, which I don't typically do. I'm not really a big fan of this knife. However, I am really glad that I have the opportunity to sample this, to play with it, and to share it with you guys, thanks to one of my awesome Instagram followers, Sam. Sam, thank you so much for trusting me with your knife and sending it out here and letting me video it. Now, there's going to be some pros and cons to this, so when we get to the TLDW section, where I break down the pros and the cons, that's going to be a lengthier section than it typically is, because what I don't want you to think is that I hate the knife. It's just not my style. It's not really for me, and I see some very basic mistakes that were made that are made by a junior knife designer, junior knife maker, somebody that hasn't had a decade or more of experience designing and making knives. But that doesn't mean it's a bad knife. So I want you to pay close attention to the pros and the cons and see how they're weighed out and see what that means to you as a collector. Let's go ahead and get the packaging open here. We've got the knife, which, by the way, the machining on it is really, really cool. The finishing by way of machining and stonewashing, I think, is pretty damn excellent. So it comes in a nice standard zippered pouch, which you would expect most custom knives to be in. Here is the card that is sent along with the knife. As well, it's also nice that he does a little handwritten thank you to his customers as well. I like that touch. And that's something that I wish more knife makers would do, whether it just be writing it on a piece of tape or signing a COA card. Okay, so here is his business card. Christopher Gillian, American Custom Knife Maker. There is his website, there is his email, and apparently he is on YouTube as well. I have not looked at his channel. I have looked through his website, however, and you'll find much more detailed information about the caged bearings that he makes than the actual knives that he makes. And that's something you'll see with a lot of custom knife makers, is there's not usually a lot of information about their individual knives, especially if they're a true custom maker, where maybe this is the only one of its kind that exists. You know, it'll basically be on the website as an archive. Number so-and-so and so-and-so were made like this with these materials, not necessarily have a whole in-depth amount of information. But if you're interested in bearings, he gives you lots of information on the bearings. And there is his QR code on there as well. Now, he does what he calls salt and pepper cage bearings. These are phosphor bronze cages that he's using black and white alternating ceramic balls inside. And judging by the size of the balls in relation to those cages, it looks like he's using fairly large ceramic balls in there, which should give you good blade stability around that pivot. Now, unfortunately, I can't give you a good example of how his bearings work because the pivot on this knife is tightened down so much that even when you're, closing it like a normal human being, not like a YouTube reviewer who's trying to demonstrate the blade action, you're actually feeling how forced and how tight that is. So you don't really get a good sense for how smooth the bearings are. As I do this, as I manually open and close it, it's even hard to tell because you have the pressure of the lock bar tension, which is only relieved on the inside. So you're pushing the detent ball against the blade, adding friction. But as I relieve that friction, they do seem pretty smooth. They certainly seem stable. There's no side-to-side play at all, even with the lock released. So I'm going to assume that his bearings are top-notch. All right, let's get into the TLDW. This is too long, didn't watch the section of the video where I do all the highline information, the big pros, the big cons, and then after that we do the specs. Then after that I give you all of the rest of my personal views on the knife, the actual review section. This time around though, however, I think I'm going to be slipping a lot of my personal review stuff into the TLDW only because there are so many points in each of the sections that I feel it's important to get the distinction of what I mean out of the way so that people don't just watch pros and then end up on cons and don't watch the rest of the video and don't understand where I'm coming from. Because what I don't want to do is dissuade you in any way from this knife if it's something that you've been interested in. All right, so we're going to start things off here, as always, with the pros. There's actually quite a bit of pros here, and I don't want you to take this video as being something negative. The first pro for me is going to be the wonderful machining of the titanium frame. When you look at the presentation side, this starburst pattern is done very, very well. And there are no sharp edges in any of the milled lines. So it feels nice and smooth to the touch. And it's got a little bit of natural traction to it as you're holding the knife because you have these ridges. I love how it looks. I love the fact that all the machined lines have a nice machined finish to them, so it's a little bit more brilliant than the standard stone-washed finish that you see on the flat portions, the raised portions. So it has a natural brilliance to it in the light, and it's much more stunning in the sunlight. When you take this outside and you move this around in the light, it really dances well. It's a really nice, well-thought-out design. For those that go back on my channel a long ways, you know that one of the production knives that I'm developing off my designs, the Airwolf, I was doing a starburst from the pivot as well. It's something that I think looks really, really good. It breaks up the lines, the overall lines of the knife very well. And it brings your eye to the pivot, which normally you would have a little bit more of an ornate pivot if you're actually going to be directing people's eyes to it. The backside, not so much, but we'll get to that in the cons section. Another pro is going to be the pocket clip. It has a lot of tension, which might be a bit too much if you're wearing jeans. Any kind of doubled over thick denim at the seam might be a problem. But I love the milling that's been done on that clip. It looks really, really good. Another pro is the edge that he puts on these. Now, it looks to my eyes like a Wicked Edge or some other consumer-grade sharpener was used. See if I can get a close-up here. I might be able to see better than with my terrible vision. Now, this is obviously a collector's knife, his own personal knife, so I don't know how much it's been used. But that would not be something you would see on a freshly sharpened Wicked Edge mirror or near mirror polish. But that could just be from Sam's use of his personal knife here. The secondary bevel intersections from the Americanized Tanto tip over to the primary bevel look very, very good and consistent from side to side. His stone wash is actually really nice. It's a nice clean stone wash that allows it to be more of a user finish. Think Hinderer XM18, XM24. And he's got a really nice finish on the primary bevels here. Honestly, it looks much more like a machined bevel. This doesn't appear to be a hand ground knife. I could be wrong about that, but I've never seen a hand ground knife come off of a grinder and have this particular finish to it. Now, he may have some surfacing belts that I don't use, I've never seen that type of finish done before, so I might be wrong on that. I don't want to make assumptions and act like it's gospel. Another pro is going to be the jimping done in the spine of the blade. Very, very tactile, very useful as well. It really does grip your skin. And while it's a little tiny bit sharp on each edge, it's not bad at all. The jimping on the flipper tab appears to have been rounded off and then probably further softened by the stone washing. Then it looks like he's gone back around very quickly and kind of done like a satin finish around it, and that further softened the jimping. But you don't really need insanely, grabby jimping when the flipper tab is as large as this one is. It's very easy to light switch, as you see. It is a little bit of a lazy detent though, and I'll get into that on the cons section. And that's where we're going to head right now. As much as I don't like doing the cons section on a custom knife made by a custom knife maker, I feel much better about doing that with production knives, because you don't feel like you're insulting any one person when you're giving a proper and thorough review to a production knife. So, see, here's that lazy detent. It's just a little bit too soft. It's very easy to fail it. It's not crisp. You don't even really feel the detent break. So I guess this will be the first con, is the detent. You should really feel that detent break away, and you don't. It's like, there's the detent, and then it just kind of opens, and not always all the way. The other con for me is this pivot feels as though it is really way, way, way too tight. And the only reason I'm not loosening this up is because it's not my knife to do that with. So if I were to loosen it just a smidge too much, the blade goes off center and then it starts rubbing on the lock and scratching up the blade. I have damaged someone else's property, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. But it's either that the pivot is far too tight or it's got far too much tension on the lock bar. And I don't really know which one it is. Yeah, that pivot. It's the pivot. Okay, so it's definitely the pivot that's too tight on there. And whether it came from Gillian Knives like that, or it was manually adjusted by the owner, Sam, because that's what he may prefer, I don't know. To give you an idea of the detent break and the action that I would expect out of a knife in this price range, because I want you to keep in mind, the Fallen Star starts at $600. Here is an $850, $900 Brown Knives. Oh. You can even, not only can you feel, but you can hear that detent break. Now, the FSD is a miraculous example of a machine custom. So it's not fair to compare the knife directly to this, but some might go, well, that action is a little bit too free-falling for my taste. You could do that by simply loosening up a pivot a lot. And I get that, totally understand. This, by the way, is the new liner lock version, not the brown lock version. So that is the smoothness that I would expect from a knife made by someone who is actively selling what are supposed to be top tier bearings. This right here is a little bit more what I would expect. Nice, smooth hydraulic action. It's not what we call drop shutty. It's not a guillotine where when you drop that lock, the blade just falls on your thumb. But it is extraordinarily smooth. Anybody that owns one of the Barnes knows how dreamlike that action really is. And Riot is using standard ceramic bearings. If you put skiffs in here, or I would say even the Gillian bearings, I don't know that you'd really make it any better, because this is about as perfect as an action can be. And these are basically the same price. And another one that I carry often and really, really love, you guys know the Devo Stout. It is absolutely magnificent on its action. And these were $2-something, I don't know, $260, $265. Very inexpensive. And that action from the detent break all the way to the feeling of the smoothness, the gliding of the blade across these surfaces is pretty damn fantastic. Hey guys, sorry for the interruption, but I promise I will make this very, very brief. I want to thank those of you that have joined and become channel members. You are helping to support the channel and helping to continue the growth. And if you've been considering supporting the channel in any way, shape, or form, because I do not have channel sponsors, I don't shill anybody's products, I don't get paid for anything, I don't do affiliate links, so everything is completely self-funded. If you'd like to help out and watch the channel grow and get more great content coming your way, please do consider becoming a member. And one more, just to be slightly unfair. You guys know my design, the Kaladin. Glass smooth, incredible detent. And it's this smooth with the bead blasted blade. On my hand rub satin blades, it's orgasmic. And this was a knife that I was selling at $255 when they were available. So there's a staggering difference between the feeling of the action, the detent break, and the feeling of gliding smoothness between the materials from each of these knives. And huge difference there. So that's something that it's hard to look past when you're buying a custom knife in the $600 plus price range. The action is going to be important. Again, nobody should expect every knife to just drop shut. That is not an indication of quality. But when you feel like you're closing your grandfather's pocket knife, that can be bothersome, especially if it's a maker who prides themselves on manufacturing bearing sets. So I really wish this pivot was looser so I could get a better feeling for how the knife is in actual operation. Because I'm pretty sure that it didn't leave his shop that tight. So anyway, that's the biggie for me. The next for me is going to be, and as I alluded to earlier in the video, the junior style of design here. There is no organic flow to the design. Here you have a fairly organic shape, nice and smooth and rounded and nice soft shapes, but put into an Americanized tanto. So there's a juxtaposition of styles between the blade and the frame that don't really make a lot of sense. You would typically see something this organic in a drop point or a spear point or something like that, where it's a little bit more of an organic shape in the blade profile. And likewise, if it was going to be a very angular Americanized tanto, you would see, harsher angles built into the frame that would properly balance visually the design overall. And the other part of the design that's, again, you see from someone who has not designed a lot of knives, is the over-exaggeration of these shapes. And this is something that I was guilty of in my first year designing the custom knives that I make. That I really wanted your hands to lock in and for it to really fit the shape of not only your hand, but your fingers. And what I didn't realize was, number one, if somebody has a really large hand, when you start cutting away such large areas, large choils there, it makes the height of the handle feel too skinny in a large hand. But most importantly, everyone has different sized and shaped hands, and you're forcing where their fingers need to be. You are forcing the index finger there, which that's totally fine. Most good designers are going to have a prominent choil there anyway. But then you're forcing the separation between these two fingers. Now, if I weighed another 100 pounds and I had big fat hands, then I would feel that poking right in between there. It would bother me. You're also telling these two fingers, you need to sit right here. So this is not neutral at all. This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of design. And then here, and instead of it being flat and straight, it's actually convexed. That's where my sized hand, I wear a large to extra large glove, that's where my pinky wants to sit. And that was why I had designed my frame with this little dip right here, because I wanted, if somebody's hand was large enough to fit where their pinky falls back there, I wanted them to feel the comfort there as well, not be pushed up. And this kind of pushes my pinky up, kind of like I'm drinking tea with my pinky up in the air. So I'm not really a big fan of the ergonomics. And to give you an example of some really good ergonomics in knives that are in my collection, while neither of these are neutral, a good neutral design is like the Barnes here. It feels really, really good in the hand, but it's not telling me where any of my fingers need to sit, and it's not forcing a hump in between any fingers. So more people are going to find this comfortable than even these because it's a very neutral shape. But you guys know Ian's print, which is a sexy, organic, flowing design from butt to tip. The handle complements the blade shape very, very nicely. It's also very, very smooth. And it's got some sexy lines to it. Again, while this is a comfortable grip in the hand, it's not particularly sexy in its blocky rectangular shape. Same goes for the stout. But when I put the stout in my hand, it feels fantastic. But a lot of times when you're a younger knife designer, knife maker, you really want to stress the fact, I am focusing on ergonomics and I want this to fit your hand like a glove. And that's great if the person that bought this knife had the exact same size, thickness, and shape hands and fingers that the knife maker does, that they predicted this would be that comfortable. Another one here is the Tuya NV4. When I put this in my hands, again, it is dramatically shaped as well, but it's not coming up to this more, let me get some focus going on here so you can actually see what it is I'm talking about. This is a much more dramatic hump here. This is much more elongated, and I don't feel that it's trapping my fingers in any one place. To be fair, there's also not a flipper tab here, making it basically a finger guard that's telling me I can't go any further forward if I don't want to. And I'm not comfortable at all with this in my hand when using the forward finger choil. And that's a little bit problematic because I tend to use my choils fairly often when I'm cutting things. I want to be a little bit closer into the blade so I feel like I've got a little bit more control. Otherwise, I'll pinch grip and throw my index finger up here, which would be perfectly fine on this knife. All right, so the action, the overall design and shape, this is always a no-no from me, because I know that the vast majority of knife collectors do not use a lanyard. So what they'll complain about is that, hey, I don't use a lanyard, so I don't want a big old hole in the presentation side of my brand new $600 plus knife. I think it looks tacky or this or that. And I've heard those complaints for so many years that I have tended to include that minor infraction into all of my reviews. I'm the kind of person, I rarely, if ever, use a lanyard, and it's got to be something where the handle is so tiny, or it's got a stupid deep carry pocket clip where I can't get a good grasp on it when I'm pulling it out of my pocket, or something like that where I feel I need a lanyard and bead to kind of help either keep it in my hand or extract it from the pocket. And this knife is neither of those. It has a smooth finish, but it's not overly slick. Feels really good. Plus you have this raised gear pattern titanium backspacer, which does feel very nice in the hand, by the way. It comes around right where you want it to for a reverse grip. All right, any other cons? Yeah, boy, that pocket clip is, it is really snug, really tight. And I do think for some people, if you're wearing jeans a lot or any kind of thick material on your pocket, you might have a hard time just kind of pushing it in your pocket. You may have to do a two-hand thing where you're prying the clip up. I do like that it's got the thumb studs, or thumb stud, by the way, single-sided. It really should be double-sided, along with the flipper tab, so you have options on how you want to deploy it. If he has this much of a dramatic cutout, I would have loved to have seen a nice big fuller, at least on the back side of the blade, because you could have reverse flicked this with all that room that he's cut out there. So again, I wanted to be very clear on what the cons were, and that none of those are the end of the world. And everybody has to start from somewhere. So I'm sure over time, as he evolves as a knife maker, and as he listens to feedback coming in from his customers, as well as from reviewers like myself, he will adapt and change the way that he overly sculpts the finger cutouts in his frames, because it just doesn't work for me, unfortunately. He did do a good job, by the way, of having such a low profile clip and placement of that clip that you really, even bearing down on it super tight, I really barely feel it in my hand. So if I was doing any kind of very hard cutting task, I wouldn't have anything to complain about with hot spots on the pocket clip. And most people screw that up. It's got a lot of hardware going on too. Not a huge fan of that. But it is a unique design. It's a unique knife all the way around. Again, I feel because of the softer, flowing, more organic shape of the frame to the very angular Americanized tanto, I think that it creates a visual imbalance. This blade looks way too short for this frame, and because of the nature of it graduating, getting narrower toward the tip, it looks too narrow for that big bulbous kind of frame. It's visually imbalanced, and for me that can usually be a deal breaker. But again, none of these are things I think that will be a deal breaker for a lot of people, but it is important to be aware of those things. And I try to always be fair and balanced, give pros and cons, and thoroughly explain each so people completely get where I'm coming from, so that you understand I don't hate the knife. It's just not something that I would want. But there is such obvious skill here in the edge, in the bevel geometry, the blade geometry, in the milling, and his lockup, that I do want to see what he does a few years from now. I'm excited to see what models may come out of his mind next after a little bit of time of getting feedback from people. Now we're going to get into the specs. Here's what we're looking at here, guys. Overall length of 8.125 inches. Your handle length is 4.85 inches. Blade length of 3.25 inches. And according to what he has written on his website, and you know what? I think it's actually on the back of the blade too. Yes, it is. Okay. CTS. I always have a problem saying that for some reason. XHP. When you put those 6 letters together, my tongue gets so tied up. And he says he does do in-house cryo treatment on these as well. And he's hitting 60 on the Rockwell scale. He's got his salt and pepper cage ceramic bearings inside with 24 bearings. And it is only 5.35 ounces in overall weight. So there's the tech specs, if you will. Now I'll finish things off with my final thoughts. Typically this section is longer in the video, but I gave you most of my personal feedback during the TLDW. I think this maker shows a lot of promise. This is not somebody I would cross off the list. This is somebody that I would follow, especially on Instagram, and watch what he's doing, see what he's developing, and see what his future designs may be. And again, Sam, thank you so much for letting me see this. When you sent me the pictures of this on Instagram and said, hey, do you want to check this out? At first I was like, nah, but the more I looked at it, I'm like, you know what? I find this fascinating. There's something about it that I feel I need to experience. And I'm very glad that I did. I am honestly glad I didn't have to spend $600 to do it, because this is one that would not have lived in the collection. And I think I would have had a little bit of a hard time getting my investment back. Mainly because this is a maker that doesn't have a big name out there. People might just go, who? Made by who? What? And those are sometimes a harder sell in the collector's world. But I do think that this maker has very clearly demonstrated he's got some skills, and I'm excited to see what he does in the future. I hope that if he were to come across this video and see it, that he doesn't get discouraged or feel that I hate his knife or hate his work or anything like that, because that is absolutely not the case. I have nits to pick with it and things that as a consumer I would prefer to see, feel, or have, and as a knife maker and a knife designer who's doing production knives now, an understanding of the basic design elements that I feel need to be on there. But at the end of the day, whether I do it for a living or not, it's still my opinion. And you may look at this knife and go, holy hell, that is the perfect marriage between a hinderer and I don't know, who does any kind of shit. No, that should be a good indication of what I was mentioning on that frame. Nobody really has that kind of shape going on. Maybe this is your interpretation of a cross between a hinderer and a Grimsmo Rask, at least with the starburst going on there. And that may be exactly what you're looking for. And I'll tell you this, if you're looking for a ridiculously sharp knife, this man knows how to make a sharp knife. And at the end of the day, that is still going to be the most important thing, that it's a functioning knife, the heat treat is done properly, and it's very, very sharp. Everyone's going to have their own different interpretations of what they feel a good action is. It could also be, and I neglected to mention this earlier, this could also be a thing where this is a knife that really needs to be broken in, and maybe Sam just hasn't played with it enough yet to really break it in. Maybe it will get smoother and loosen up a little bit over time. I really don't feel a difference here. And there are times where I've had knives that were very stiff when I first got them, and by the time I got done with the video, notice my finger is not on the lock bar. By the time I got done with the video, it loosened up tremendously. So that could also be the case as well. So again, don't want to say that it's entirely the fault of the knife maker. This could just be Maybe Sam decided to over-tighten the pivot because that's his personal preference. And you know what? If that's what works for him, cool. But I just don't know. Anyway, them's my thoughts on the Fallen Star by Gillian Knives. And I'm excited to see what he does in the future. I'll be following him. I'll be keeping an eye on what he's doing. He does have a Gillian Knives Instagram account that I noticed he has a personal Instagram, which for some reason his personal Instagram has more updates on knife builds than the strictly only business Gillian Knives Instagram. So I would suggest following them both to more accurately see what it is that he's doing and what knives may be dropping at some point in the future. With that, guys, I'm out of here. Thank you so much as always for joining me, and I'll see you on the next video.